you guys have been doing the. You mentioned doing a study since 2007. You're referring to the ACL Relay work that you guys are doing there? Can you explain what you're doing with that? And are you taking a lot of subsets in this data and making kind of these analyses like in this current paper, and what we can expect and look forward to in the future from that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is an ongoing prospective cohort study where we follow these young athletes over time after ACL reconstruction. Like I mentioned earlier, we follow them standardly to 2 years, where we're testing them at regular intervals. And then in a sub-cohort, we also brought them back 3 years after their 2-year testing visit, so basically 5 years after the time of return to sport, and retested them, as well as did knee MRIs to evaluate their knee cartilage. Some of those data have been published. A lot of this longitudinal work has been led by Laura Schmidt, so I've just kind of been lucky to have been involved with it during my PhD and to continue to collaborate on this project. But you're right, it is a longitudinal project that has been ongoing for 10 years. And so I think that raises some questions about, have ACL reconstruction rehab practice patterns changed over time? Were the early patients the ones that were doing, really poorly, and then the more recent patients doing better? We have looked at that a little bit, and we don't see that that's the case. So when we look to see, how many patients are meeting strength thresholds or meeting, hot performance thresholds, if we look in, kind of group them over time, or we look in quartiles of time, like the first 4 years, the next 4 years, so on and so forth, we don't really see differences, which is maybe slightly discouraging, that the message isn't getting out there, that that practice isn't changing. But I think we're building, hopefully, a body of evidence that is telling the story. And I hope that through avenues like this, podcasts and other, social media distribution, that we get this information to clinicians to say, this is what we're seeing, and these are areas that we can really improve, or these are things that we should really focus on measuring or testing or evaluating in these patients.
To give some context on some of the numbers that you gave in the introduction of your paper, it was on average at all levels of sports, and not just competitive sports, a little over 60% return to pre-injury levels, and that's recreational. That's what they were doing before. For competitive level sport, it was 33 to 55% ish, something like that, which is consistent. You guys actually found 59%, so 70 of the 124 athletes that you guys looked at made it, but that was still only 59% of the athletes returned, or 56%, sorry, returned to their pre-injury levels. So to the point that you just made, we've still got a lot of work to do, but maybe we're in that conscious incompetence phase where at least we're, like you said, we're spreading the word and creating awareness. And it's obviously a slow process to kind of gain momentum in this direction, but I think things are certainly looking up. What else can we expect coming down the pipeline from you, whether be it from that particular longitudinal data or what you got going on?
Yeah, so I think what you'll probably see in the near future out of this ACL Relay cohort study is continuing to look at some of these longitudinal data over time. So these patients that we test out to 2 years and out to 5 years, what are early factors that are associated with who has even longer term success. So we published a study a few months ago that was looking at some of the imaging data. So we looked at early cartilage change. So basically we have MRI measures that can evaluate changes in the matrix of the cartilage prior to them developing radiographic osteoarthritis, for example. And so in this cohort, we brought them back and did these MRIs to see, are there factors early, at the time of return to sport or shortly thereafter, that are associated with who starts to develop early kind of subclinical signs of osteoarthritis versus not. So I think you'll see some of those data continue to be published, as well as we are doing some work toward trying to develop clinically relevant second injury kind of screening tools, particularly as it relates to movement assessments. So hopefully some of those data soon. They've been presented recently at CSM and whatnot. So I think those are some of the upcoming things to look for from this ACL Relay cohort study. And then for me specifically, since I've been down here at UAB, we have also, working with Mark and Laura, started to do some work looking at novel ways to try to target late-stage rehab interventions for these patients. So thinking of ways that we can specifically target muscle performance in different ways, whether that be through force development capacity in the muscles versus kind of velocity-dependent measures. So we know that things like rate of torque development is another big problem for these patients, not just how much force can they produce, but also how quickly can they do that. Power is the key factor in almost every sport-related movement, which encompasses both of these items. And so I'm starting to do some work looking at that. So some things along those lines, trying to figure out ways that we can really target rehab interventions, especially late stage, for these patients. So that may be on the horizon. We'll see how it goes. But we're kind of in the pilot stages of that work right now. So.